Hello, class is now in session. Welcome to Wicca 101. This week our lesson is going to be focused on who is the god and the goddess of Wicca. I am Brigantia Blackbird of Blackbird's Brew, and if you haven't already joined in the conversation in our Discord group, there will be a link in the description box below. And especially if you're wanting to use any of the homework assignments to help you kind of develop your thinking process, interacting with the group is probably going to be the best way for you to make the full use of this class. So, now before we dig into this, let me first fully and freely admit that the nature of the god and the goddess and questions surrounding divinity are extremely complicated. I do not pretend to have any of the answers. I just think that throughout human history we have come to a point where we are able to ask more intelligent questions. But it may very well be that the details of who they are, why they are, how they came into being, how we came into being, these might be things that we don't necessarily discover within our lifetimes. That could be a legitimate part of essentially religious mystery in Wicca. But what we can do is seek out. What we can do is make the effort to learn based on what information is available to us and what experiences that we have, if anyone in this class decides that becoming a Wiccan is something that they really want to do. So with that caveat out of the way, let us begin. The primary deities of Wicca are the god and the goddess. The god is often referred to as the horn god because in many of our illustrations he is pictured with antlers or with sheep horns. Now let me make it clear that this has absolutely nothing to do with the figure of the devil in Christian mythology. One of the important things to separate in our minds that what's going on in Christianity is its own spiritual family tree, and what's going on with Wicca is also its own thing. We do not have a devil. If you are seeing animalistic traits on deities, either the god, the goddess, or someone of an ancient pantheon, it is culturally specific. It has to do with roots in nature. It has nothing to do with forces of evil, such as what we would see in Christian mythology. So, now that that other caveat's out of the way, part of what these horns symbolize, or antlers, however he's pictured by an individual artist, it has everything to do with his wild nature, the raw, primal energy of his very being, and also the fact that he does have a close, special relationship with the animal kingdom, particularly the undomesticated animals, the ones who are out there living free, very in tune with the primal energies of Earth. The god is also associated with the sun, and it's the journey of the sun throughout the Wheel of the Year mythology that illustrates our own journey of life and death and rebirth and that process and how it comes and goes over and over again. So the god in particular, his stories are teaching us about the mortality of our physical beings, the mortality of our flesh, and that we do have only limited amounts of time in any particular incarnation. So there we have a need to attend to our business at the proper time of life. We have a need to flow with these natural cycles and not fight against them. Now, I'm not saying this is easy, but I am saying that once we're consciously aware that this is part of what we're meant to be doing, we can work on removing roadblocks in our thinking and removing roadblocks in our behavioral patterns so we can get more in tune with the natural ebb and flow. Now, despite the wildness of the god's nature, his energy itself is actually inherently orderly. He's out with these undomesticated beings doing all this wild and crazy stuff, but his yearly routine of what he's doing at certain times of the years and why he's doing it, it's just going round and round like clockwork. Steady, reliable, predictable. Everything about nature is operating on the basis of natural law, and the god's mythology really reflects that. For all of the untamed nature of it, for all the things that we have no capacity to control, it is still operating according to its own rules, and that's something that does create a kind of order, and it's something that's worth further meditation. Now, the god's energy is also very projective, and this is very active. He's a doer. He's representing the light, being able to take action, visibility, open actions, the external, what we can see. He's associated with the elements of air and fire. Air is the element of the mind, so your capability of rationality, your imagination, even your instinct to a certain degree. It's thought that really cuts through matter and creates its own space and gets right into the heart of things. Now, fire is the element of desire, of drive, and willpower. The nature of fire is to consume and renew. These are very active, very outward motion, very taking over kind of energies. Now, because of this, the god is really the embodiment of masculinity. Very classic, traditional traits, but it's expressed on a godly, divine level. On a level that, we obviously don't see in other human beings. But he's, in essence, essentially the bar by which masculinity is measured. He is a father and son. He has the roles of husband and lover, warrior and sage, oak king and holly king, and among many others. He's this ever-present person who's, just going through this yearly routine, helping keep the cycle of life going within ourselves, within the planet, and within the universe itself. Now this brings us to the goddess, who is sometimes called the Silver Lady, and of course the silver is a reference to moonlight. And the primary symbol of the goddess is the moon. She's given special honor and focus during Esbat rituals, during the new moon and the full moon. And in the Wheel of the Year, she's representing the immortality of our spirits, of our souls. The goddess neither born nor does she die within this metaphor. And how she appears and what she's doing, it's in direct relationship with where the god is, what he's doing, what his stage of life is during this year. Her adaptability speaks to the adaptability of female nature. And her mythology teaches us about the eternal nature of our spirit and how we can't just remain the same. We have to evolve and adapt through all the different tides of life. We need to be reactive to our environments in order to decide how most appropriately to interact with them. Now, the goddess is generally seen as a gentler energy than the god, more focused on, perhaps domestic, everyday concerns. However, the nature of her energy is chaos. It's through the energy of chaos that creation can actually take place and be made manifest. Even in the midst of the goddess routine, because she's right there along with the god throughout the Wheel of the Year, but there's a sense of spontaneity, twists and turns and surprises along the way. She's also operating in accordance with natural law, but she plays a different role from the god. The god is like the order of Newtonian physics. It's very predictable. You know where things are going to be. You know how different things are going to behave. But the goddess is like the chaos of quantum mechanics. You never quite know where anything is or what it's going to do all at the same time. And in fact, science has yet to explain how both the Newtonian physics and quantum mechanics are coexisting in the same universe and reality without essentially annihilating each other. And they seem to be working together in some fashion. Science doesn't have the answer for us that. But we can see and have daily proof that they do. And so also the god and the goddess are in this cooperative relationship. They each have their role to play and they are fulfilling that role. The goddess's energy is more passive, it's receptive. She's more contemplative and nurturing, and she represents the dark. This can be the darkness of the womb, the darkness of the tomb, the darkness of our souls, everything that's going on with us internally, our thoughts, our emotions, our dreams, everything that doesn't necessarily show on the outside of us, that's going inside here. She's present. It is her style of energy. The goddess is associated with the elements of earth and water. Earth is the element of the material world, so growth, nurturing, regeneration. It envelops growing seeds. It reabsorbs past growth. Whereas water is the element of emotion, and it's not just our own emotions, but it's our capacity to be able to relate to other people on the emotional level, and the sometimes overwhelming force of emotion itself. Some of our more sensitive practitioners, when something's going on in the world, they can just feel it like a tidal wave washing over them. But water also creates its own path. It refreshes the spirit, and it plays a huge role in sustaining life and in nurturing life. The goddess, forgive me scrolling down, I do have a lot of notes today, but the goddess is the embodiment of femininity, and one of the ways we relate to her is through the metaphor of maiden, mother, crone. These are illustrated by the phases of the moon, and they correlate with different stages in a woman's life. She is also the keeper of the hearth, the priestess of the temple. She is a queen. She's an artist. She's the mother. She's the shield maiden. She's all these various things. Now, as I've alluded to before, the god and the goddess are complementary partners. And this duality within Wicca, the masculine god and the feminine goddess working in concert, is a reflection of the balance and the harmony of natural energies. Everything in nature fits together. And we as human beings, we are a species that are a bridge between the animal world and the spiritual world of gods. In a way, we are half and half. And that enables us to see the fingerprints of divinity everywhere around us and within ourselves, and how the big picture all fits together. Now, the god and the goddess, they are not at war with one another. They are not competing with each other. They do not have an eternal conflict with them both having the hope of achieving dominance once and for all. It simply is not like that. They do have things they share in common, just as men and women have a great deal that they share in common. But they also have qualities that are unique to themselves. The god and the goddess are of equivalent status. Then neither one is more important than the other. And this idea of balance between the masculine and feminine influences and energies is absolutely vital in paganism generally, but also Wicca in particular because of the nature of how we practice. There's not supposed to be only the masculine or only the feminine, and this is where I disagree very strongly with Dianic Wiccans who focus solely on the goddess. Sometimes the justification I've heard is because of the patriarchy, and somehow the wounds left on their souls by the god of Abraham is somehow preventing them connecting with the god of Wicca, as if these aren't two different people. But I don't pretend to understand their thought process. I can only explain the basis upon which I disagree and why. But I think that it is meant to be both god and goddess, male and female, in balance and cooperation and complementing each other, coming together and pulling together as a team. Now, to go any further, we have to examine some theories of deity and divinity. There are 4 primary theories that I've come across with at my time. I'm not going to say these are the only theories that people have, but they are the ones that I encounter with the greatest amount of frequency, both in books and in conversation with other practitioners. And it's worth comparing and contrasting all of these, because when you're at the start of it, you can't just say, well, I think this. Well, okay, but why do you think that? So-and-so said so. Well, so what? I mean, so-and-so might have gone through quite a thinking process and really philosophized and thought about it and reached a conclusion on that basis, but their work is not your work. If you're going to have a true opinion for yourself, you're the one who has to really go through that intellectual process and analyze and think about not just what you think, but why you think it, what led you to a particular conclusion, and that's if you reach a conclusion. But let's get on with the theories. The first I would describe as individualism. The god and the goddess in this theory are fully realized, separate, independent entities who work in concert and harmony with one another as a matter of choice and as a matter of keeping the universe together. The ancient pantheons in relationship to this could be viewed as essentially descendants of the original pair. They all originate from the same source, they draw their power from the same source, and they are related to one another, but they are individuals, and that would account for, the differences in their stories, differences in their priorities, and things of that kind. Now, this idea would explain why some people mesh well with certain deities, but not with others. Just like not every person gets along with everybody else they ever meet, not every person is going to connect well with every deity. And what this idea does not explain is why there are such strong connections between certain deities, and it's so many similarities to the point where scholars speculate that they might actually be one and the same. So you can see there's points to consider on both sides, and these are just 2 points that I've brought up. There are many more, but I don't want to overwhelm the video. The second theory we're going to consider is that it's the same pantheon, we just have individuals within the pantheon with different names. This is actually a pretty popular theory. Now, this arises from the observation that many of the gods and goddesses share a lot of the same areas of concern. And it goes on that, these gods and goddesses, they are individuals, they are separate people, but they comprise one pantheon rather than multiple pantheons. And this has led to the thought process that perhaps the different names reflect the languages of the cultures the gods were interacting with. It's what people of that culture happen to call them at a particular time. And there's even some evidence to suggest that within the same culture, individual gods were given different names at different time periods. One example of that would have been the god Lu, and there's also some confusion with goddesses like Rhiannon and so on. But this is an issue that does crop up. Now, the differences of mythological stories from one similar god to another, they might reflect how a particular culture interacted with those gods. You know, their relationship took a different course. It was a different situation, different people, different norms, and that these differences, they don't indicate multiple pantheons. It just meant that people made different choices in their relationships with the gods, or the gods might have been in a different stage of their development, and that could account for some differences. Now, this theory very succinctly explains why there are similarities between various deities, and it serves as a reasonable explanation for why those similarities exist. Well, I mean, if you're dealing with, the goddess of love in this culture, she's going to be similar to the goddess of love in this other culture, and, that would account for it. But what it does not explain is why some practitioners get rebuffed by a deity of one pantheon, but they're welcomed with open arms by that deity's counterpart in another pantheon. One example of this in my own experience, is that, as I mentioned in another video previously, I was rejected by Hecate. She was very nice, very polite, but she did show me the door. However, her counterpart, a similar goddess, who was at least strongly associated with witchcraft, the Morrigan, has very much welcomed me with open arms, and essentially gets annoyed when I have put greater distance in that relationship, and is... Well, we're getting along better now that I'm getting more comfortable with her, I'll put it that way. So if these are both goddesses with strong ties to witchcraft, why, and if they might be essentially the root same person, why would one reject me and the other accept me? It's a question to consider. Now this brings us to the third theory, which I call the prism. You have different aspects, but it's one whole. This idea is that essentially all goddesses are part of the goddess, and likewise all gods are part of the god. From this standpoint, if we're addressing a deity by a specific name, it's simply because we're looking to interact with the deity in accordance with the office or the area of concern that the deity of that name is thought to possess. It's a declaration of the capacity that we're looking to work with them in. Now, some people go a step further and say that the god and the goddess themselves are one being, and we only perceive them as being separate as a means to make it easier for us to comprehend them and interact with them, smaller chunks that our brains can manage. Now, this theory does explain commonalities amongst deities, and it breaks down the concept of divinity into a digestible form. If you're only having to think about one or two, that's a lot easier than, tens or hundreds. But what this theory does not explain is how the different deities, who are supposedly aspects of the greater whole, have such different priorities, different skill sets, different values, different journeys. It's a legitimate question, and it's, again, something that is worth thinking about. Now this brings us to our fourth and final theory, and it's the idea that the god, the goddess, gods of ancient pantheons, they are thought forms. Now the premise of this is that through the power of human imagination and storytelling, over time, archetypes emerged, and these archetypes took on larger-than-life proportions, and they are so firmly anchored in human consciousness that they've become a thing. And that essentially energy in the form of prayer, meditation, storytelling, other means, that it builds up these archetypes, and these archetypes function as a battery. And the source of the battery's power is human belief. And drawing upon that stored energy in spells is drawing upon the battery, making use of that energy. I belong to the school of thought that says anything you can create is not greater than yourself. Therefore, a thought form god would not be greater than the humans who dreamt it and who fed energy into it. So this becomes the question. Can a thought form be properly considered a deity? My answer to this question, and it does not have to be your answer, you could arrive to a different conclusion, I would suggest that you examine any conclusions and make sure that they have logical consistency and are coherent in thought. But my thought is that without an independent existence, without independent will and personality, I would argue that a thought form does not meet the qualifications for an entity being a god. The very least of which would be being greater than human beings. That means greater intelligence, arguably more enlightened than we are. Certainly a god must be wiser than us and have a greater amount of power at their disposal than we do. A thought form, no matter how much you build that up and no matter how much energy you pump in to draw upon later, it's still essentially not greater than yourself. So for me, this is a line of reasoning that I reject, and so I do not think that the god and the goddess or any of the ancient pantheons are just thought forms. That's just my opinion. You might arrive at a different conclusion. The important thing is just to think your conclusion through. So whatever the nature of the gods is, whether they fit it neatly into one of the boxes I just described, or whether or not the truth is something that we simply can't comprehend or that we haven't asked the right questions to learn about, we still are left with the need to get to know them. So given what we've just heard about the common theories, how can we arrive at an actual conclusion as to what is the essential nature of the god and the goddess, as well as the ancient pantheons and their mythologies? Now, I have tried asking for answers directly in meditations and dreams, divinations, because that's how I am. I see no harm in simply asking the question and seeing what happens. And I've reached out to multiple deities, hoping that one of them would see fit to at least point me in the right direction. Not what happened. The nudge I get from them is to keep thinking about it, keep considering the question. And this tells me that my task is to continue thinking through this idea through every angle I can think of and to keep searching until I find something that satisfies me. And I suppose, in a way, that's what all of our tasks is. We have to look for answers that actually fit in with the questions we have, that fit the concerns, that satisfy us on some deeper level. And divinity is very complicated. I think it's not without reason that there have been so many different religions, so many different concepts of gods that have developed throughout human history, and the popularity of these ideas have ebbed and flowed throughout time. I think we're all striving to find the answer, and I think part of it is that we need to find value in the journey itself. We can gain insight and perspective and find brand new questions to explore as we go through this journey, and that might be even more important than just getting a clear-cut answer of, God saying, okay, this is who I am, what I'm about. That doesn't require us to think. That doesn't require us to evolve. That's just listen and accept. Whereas with this way, when there's some ambiguity, when there's some mystery, it forces us to get out of our comfort zone and just contemplate and think. So, as we're exploring the question, we can certainly study mythology. Comparing and contrasting stories stimulates the thinking process, especially once you start getting beneath the surface on these stories. You might find clues that give you an answer. Meditation, even if you don't get a direct answer, if you are able to successfully connect with the deity, the interactions you have with that entity might give you some useful clues. Divination. Not a guarantee that this will give you an answer, but it can be a stepping stone on the journey nonetheless. It might give you stuff. You need to go here and think about this next in order for you to make progress in this. Certainly prayer, specifically prayer that's requesting guidance in your explorations. I really don't think that the gods are going to prepare us a chart that just explains the order of everything. But I do have a sense that they are willing to steer us away from erroneous conclusions if we ask for their help. So, worthwhile doing even if we're not getting that concrete answer that we think we might want. And certainly, we need to keep our eyes and ears open. I have found that sometimes we are getting information that would be helpful, little hints and clues, but we're not necessarily aware of it at the time. But if we try to make an effort to be more sensitive to these, little nudges, we might discover we're receiving more guidance than we previously thought. There's things all around us that could possibly be signs or possibly be, nudges or shoves to put us in a particular direction. But we're not going to notice these things if we're not open to it. So in the midst of this search, what we can do is resolve to learn as much as we can. Do our best to look beyond what can be seen and understood on the surface level. The god and the goddess are deities of ancient pantheons. They are much more complicated than we are. We can learn from their stories and from them directly on a much deeper level if we make the effort to do so. Will we ever find the ultimate answer? I don't know, but I think it's worth trying. And I think that is a major part of any religion, whether it's Wicca or another tradition. It's trying to know who is it, what is the truth about who you're worshiping, and why are they wanting you to go through life and practice certain things in the way that they do. That's really at the core of a lot of it. So, that's that. It's time for homework. Just 3 questions to contemplate this week. First is, what do you think of the idea of a religion having both a god and a goddess? Because for many people who came from a monotheistic background and there was just a masculine god, that it is a new thought. It's a different way of looking at the universe. So what do you think about that, just in generally? And next, consider the theories of deity. What seems the most plausible possibility to you, and why? What theory seems least likely to you, and why? These are questions that are... I try to ask questions in these homework assignments that matter to you. You know, it doesn't matter to me... Well, I mean, it matters to me because I'm interested in hearing what people think, and I'd love to have more conversations about this. But it's... You know, the greatest importance is not that you are telling me what you think. The important part is that you are finding and contemplating these ideas for yourself. It's about that journey you're taking within your own mind. And so our third and final question is, if you decided to further investigate the nature of the god and the goddess, and by extension probably the ancient pantheons would come into play with that, what would you choose to do as a starting point, and why? I ask this question because if you do eventually decide that Wicca is for you, just sometimes knowing where to start and being able to tell yourself, okay, I'm starting here because I think I'll, get this out of it, or because I think it'll teach me something that I need to know before I can move on to other things. I think sometimes that's the hardest part. I think that's the toughest roadblock. But if you just know where to start, you at least have, you've at least overcome the first hurdle, I'll put it that way. So I think that's it for this week. I hope you've enjoyed the class. I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. Sunday afternoons at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Blackbird's Brew on Discord. We're going to have voice chats in the workshop channel. Again, there's going to be a link in the description box below, so I hope you'll join us there. But for now,